Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining CSBA for our Close the Achievement Gap webinar, where we will analyze the recently released California State test results and also discuss CSBA's new campaign for decisive state action to rapidly close the achievement gap. The release of the CAS scores is a highly anticipated day in California education circles and for many people who care about public schools. So we're eager to go through the data, try and make sense of the results. It seems that there's some very encouraging progress this year. And yet at the same time, we recognize there's a long way to go to move all students to proficiency. So we'll take a look at both what is in front of us now in terms of today's data, as well as a historical perspective on student achievement in California and achievement gaps, and what we would like to see in the future from the state to better support our local educational agencies in their ongoing work to bring all students to proficiency. So thanks for joining us. We're going to take care of a couple of housekeeping details before we get to the heart of the matter. We will have a Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. We ask that you reserve your questions to the end. We are typically not going to be answering questions as we go along. You can, however, enter your question at any time using the Q&A icon. Those are the two speech boxes that you see highlighted in the red square on your screen. We also ask that you do not use the chat function, that you restrict your entry of questions into the Q&A, and we will get to as many questions as we can at the end of the formal presentation. The presentation today is supposed to last 90 minutes at the most, and we are going to try and move through questions rapidly so we can field as many as possible. And moving on to the next slide, please. The people who are going to make sense of the information before us today and also provide the vision and perspective for CSBA's campaign are listed before you on the list of panelists. First, we have Vernon M. Billy, CSBA's CEO and Executive Director. Vernon could not be here today because of extenuating circumstances, but this is a passion project of his, and he has provided a message which we will read to the membership and to our viewers prior to going into the panel portion of the discussion. We also have CSBA President, Dr. Betty Lusk, as well as our President-elect, Dr. Deborah Shade. The people who will be breaking down the data for you are CSBA Principal Research Manager, Dr. Jeremy Anderson, and Mary Briggs, our Senior Director of Research and Education Policy Development. To provide the local perspective, we have Mickey Inbody, Superintendent in Fontana USD. We also have available to us to answer questions as needed, Kristen Lindgren-Brazzoni, CSBA's General Counsel, and CSBA Chief of Governmental Relations, Patrick O'Donnell. I'm Troy Flint, CSBA Chief of Communications, and I will be your moderator for today. Now I will turn it over to my colleague, CSBA Principal Research Manager, Dr. Jeremy Anderson, to review the data that we have before us as soon as we read the CEO's message. For decades, the state of California has held local governing boards accountable through various mechanisms, including, for example, audits and state mandates, but has never held its agencies or policymaking bodies accountable for the quality and accessibility of the support and assistance provided to local educational agencies laboring to improve student achievement. The state has not created a comprehensive, coherent plan to hold itself accountable for its own role in closing the achievement gap, instead relying on unfunded or underfunded mandates and at times disparate funding programs thrust on local school districts and county offices of education. This initiative is about changing that dynamic so the state takes greater responsibility for its role in supporting LEAs in their ongoing work to address the achievement gap. CSBA believes it's time for the state to turn from a compliance approach toward a customer service or concierge approach to help, not direct, LEAs. This service-oriented mindset must be self-reflective and focus on examining and establishing benchmarks, goals, standards, and specific measures the state itself will take to change its operations in order to help LEAs close the achievement gap. And that is the CEO message from Vernon M. Billy, CSBA CEO and Executive Director. And now we will dive into the numbers with our Principal Research Manager, Dr. Jeremy Anderson.
Thanks, Troy. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeremy Anderson, and I'm here just to give a very early, somewhat limited look at the data that just went up about an hour ago. Again, this is a very early analysis of English language arts and math, but just know that as we move forward with our efforts, we're going to be doing deeper dives. We will look at these scores by grade level, adding additional students groups, adding on science, and then performing a more comprehensive gap analysis to really understand what's happening under the hood and the pace of the change that we're seeing. So as Troy mentioned, there are some very promising changes in this year's numbers, particularly amongst student groups who have been historically disadvantaged. African American students in English language arts and Hispanic students in English language arts saw some substantial gains upward in the change from 2024. Foster youth as well saw some substantial gains upward. And we see every student group across the board inching forward in positive progress. So positive progress is always good to see. The other side of that is that we have still not reached pre-pandemic levels. So as we inch forward, the pace of that growth over time is something we're going to want to keep an eye on. Next slide, please. Similar to English language arts, we see some real positive growth in mathematics, particularly amongst our state's African American students, Hispanic students, and foster youth. Pacific Islander students and all students in general saw positive growth upwards. Again, most of these have not reached pre-pandemic levels, so we continue inching upwards in a positive direction. We also just want to be very mindful of looking at the gaps between student groups and where the growth is happening in relation to student groups who have traditionally performed very well and some that have not. So if you could progress to the next slide, please. It's really important not to just consider these test scores as one moment in time. We have to take the long view of these test results to really understand these trends. Because while it is a very positive year for some student groups, we still see substantial equity concerns going back decades. The gaps between the highest and lowest performing groups are substantial, and more work needs to be done to close some of those gaps as we move forward. Let's take a look at math next. Same story as English language arts. We see substantial gaps between our highest and lowest performing groups over time. And it's important as we look at these trend lines and we unpack these numbers that every point and every year represented on this graph represents millions of California students. These are real people who are progressing through this educational system, and incremental change upwards over time isn't serving them as they move through this system. Numbers tell a story, but it only tells us so much about the students who those numbers actually represent. Like I said, as we move forward in this conversation, we are going to explore those disparities more by looking at achievement gaps, performing gap analyses, and then breaking down this data more and more into more granular levels so it can be better understood. And as we talk about this long view, and as we talk about the importance of these equity disparities between our student groups, I want to turn it to our Senior Director, Mary Briggs, to provide some more perspective.
Thank you, Jeremy. I just want to take a moment to say I appreciate your comments about the long view. Thinking about this today, I've been in the education system since 1997 when I first started as a classroom teacher. Daughter of a county office of education employee, grew up in the world of education, and I know that there is so much heart and soul that goes into the work of serving our students. It's encouraging to see the investment the good intentions, the funding, and the incremental progress. But that long view piece and those gaps components are really actually something that we need to zoom out and think about more. It's really a generational impact. These are generations of our students, California's future, that are depending on our system to meet their needs and to serve them better. And we know that there's been a lot of work in this area, but what has really been missing is a coherent strategy from the state to transform education in a way that supports locals in their efforts to serve their students. So we acknowledge and appreciate the shift from No Child Left Behind to the local control and funding formula and local control and accountability. That shift from top-down improvement mandates was really important. Also, what was supposed to go hand in hand with that was a coherent system of supports, a strategy that the state would do in providing support to LEAs in building their capacity to address some of these issues like our gaps. And unfortunately, in recent years, we've seen a transition away from some of that logic and into more of a fragmented approach of categorical programs where you're restricted in how you spend your money on certain programs, and you end up with initiative overload. And as a local educator, trying to navigate a system of countless initiatives, mandates and funding sources while trying to address issues on the ground can really strain the system. And what is a statewide problem? These achievement gaps are, consistent across the state and over decades. It requires a statewide strategy, an all hands on deck approach, and a sense of urgency. So these incremental steps are great. But again, I've been in education since 1997, and the incremental steps have never led to a closure of the gap. And that's no longer something that CSBA is willing to live with. And so we really want to think about how the state can step up its role in thinking about how it can develop that coherent system, because when everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. And we've lost that kind of singular focus on addressing the outcomes for students. So I want to hand this over to Troy Flint, who will lead some of the discussion in terms of how CSBA is going to approach this work moving forward.
Thank you, and I would invite all our panelists to turn their cameras on as we have this panel discussion, because really this is an effort that is going to require buy-in from throughout the state, across all levels of the education community and the public in general. As Mary so elegantly stated, we celebrate the results that we saw today. It's always so encouraging and invigorating to see that more kids are moving to proficiency and that achievement gaps are closing. At the same time, however, we have to be realistic and note that the progress has been incremental and that the achievement gap has endured and persisted for decades. And if we continue to move at the same pace that we are currently, it will be generations before we're bringing all students or the vast majority of students to proficiency. And we know that the majority of those students who are lagging behind, sometimes far behind, are concentrated in certain demographic groups. And so for us, this is a time of incredible urgency. There is a moral and an economic imperative to make closing the achievement gap the premier issue in the state of California, certainly in the education community, if not generally, because a strong educational foundation is needed for California to succeed in all ways, to be strong and healthy in a civic fashion, for us to remain economically prosperous. And we've allowed this to linger too long, not because people don't care, but because, as Mary said in her comments, we haven't had a coherent, cohesive system which explicitly named the problem, which set clear and transparent goals and benchmarks, that the state is supposed to hit in terms of providing support to close the achievement gap. So we're going to talk with several educators and researchers who have deep experience in this, including CSBA President Dr. Betty Lusk and CSBA President-elect Dr. Deborah Shade. And we also have a current superintendent from Fontana USD, Mickey Inbody. So I welcome you all to this conversation. Thanks for joining us today. So my first question, Betty, would be, as the president of the organization, as someone who has worked in almost every capacity of leadership related to public schools, if you could talk about the importance of the achievement gap from your perspective, reflecting on your experience as a superintendent, a principal, a counselor, a school board member, and president of a statewide association, and why the urgency is great now.
Thank you, Troy. Thank you. First and foremost, I want to say that I am very proud that we have made some progress, although inches, but over the decades. I was a principal in 1991 at a high school that was underperforming, declared underperforming by the state. Actually, my district was declared underperforming. And one of the things that we said then, and I'm ready to say again, is that we need to really make progress on leaps and bounds rather than inches. So celebrate what we have accomplished thus far, but that underperforming school that I was counselor, principal of in the 90s, still continues to be not underperforming, but it has not made the progress that we should have made at that point. What did we do then? And I'm grateful for the state perspective, because that's actually what we need to have in place today. The state focus that is intentional about closing that achievement gap. We had in the 90s a playbook, and most of us know football, a playbook that was provided policies and procedures, guidelines that would ensure the success of each student. The first thing we did, and I'm going to be brief, was to look at our culture of belief in the potential of every child. We spent a year just focusing on how to cultivate a belief in the potential of each child within that school, within our communities, with our parents. Low expectations and the belief that students don't have the potential to grow is what keeps us stagnated. And I think that's an area that we need to focus on at this point. We also focused on looking at providing a robust support for students that were high needs to be successful. We did many things, but we were intentional about those things in the 90s. And that's what we need to focus on at this time. A plan that would allow us to be collaborative, coherent, a comprehensive plan. And I think that's what CSBA, I know that's what we want to do as an organization, to support our membership and to really make sure that every child has a bright future.
Thank you, Dr. Lusk. I appreciate that. And I will turn it now to Dr. Deborah Shade, CSBA's president-elect. If you could talk a little bit more about a point that Betty raised, which is that locals are really engaged in the work of closing the achievement gap, but what they're looking for is more support, more differentiated assistance, more resources and investment that are explicitly tied to the achievement gap and closing that gap? And can you talk about the importance of the difference between state directed or mandated action as opposed to the state increasing the infrastructure of support and making that more accessible to people? If you could speak on that, please, Deborah.
Yeah, well, thank you, and welcome to all our listeners. First of all, I just want to acknowledge the work that's being done in our classrooms across California every day. And they are our incredible teachers and superintendent administrators are functioning under a system that has put many barriers in place that, as Troy just mentioned, are really not setting a sort of comprehensive plan or focused plan that allows that freedom and that advocacy and focus of resources so that the change can be made in much bigger way than incremental change over time. One of the things about a persistent achievement gap is that it is really a call for action. When you have an achievement gap that is only improving slightly over time, something needs to change. And I think that's why we're here. We talked earlier about those unfunded mandates and every year having something new on the plate that is distracting energy and putting energy away from direct contact and direct instruction for our students. So this is really what this action is today, is really looking to our state leaders. We are looking for focus. We're looking for a coherent plan. We're looking for benchmarks. We're looking for goals that are really going to set up a system of success for all students. We know that closing the achievement gap in California is going to impact every community, our economy, and the future of the state. So it's really important. We are on this. We are looking for the next round of our elected officials to put this as a priority for California and a priority for our students and help our local education agency, our local schools, our local districts do the work that they can do, free them up, provide the resources, and provide this coherent plan that's going to allow us to achieve that dream for all California students.
Thank you. Very well said, Deborah. And I'd like another local perspective from Superintendent Inbody of Fontana USD, a district that has been extremely intentional about closing the gaps and experienced some success there. They're not alone, as today's scores show. There are districts all across the state, pockets of excellence, and that is responsible for the incremental progress that we saw. But the question is, what specifically can the state do differently to accelerate that progress so it moves from incremental to astronomical? Superintendent Inbody.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. It's my honor to stand beside all of you on this great work in front of us. I do want to reiterate a couple of things that have been said, because just the idea of believing in our students and our scholars in California is critical. Like, the students will function so much better in a system that believes in them, elevates them, and rallies together to ensure their success. So thank you, Betsy, for starting off with those comments. I appreciate that. And also that this is a call to action. These latest results that you just saw, I'm really proud of the team that we have here in Fontana for making the progress we did make this last year. But what the biggest difference is between NCLB, because that's when I started my administrative career, and today, is that distance from standard, the growth, the fact that we're looking at growth. We may not have standard med exceeded and the progress there, but students are moving and they're moving in the right direction. It's real. These are all students that we are leaving behind, and it's uneven in the results. So we need to rally together. And I appreciate just the conversation here to invite the state to be a true partner in this work. We're the ones at the local level leading it, and these numbers mean something to us. They are our students, are our future, and we're all responsible for them, including the state. So if we're going to close the achievement gap in a lasting way, and in Fontana, we like to say that all of our scholars will leave us employed, enlisted, or enrolled, or all three. In order to impact the economy, thank you, Deborah, I appreciate you saying that. In order to impact the economy, we need to make sure our students are armed with their next move when they graduate from our district. So the work that's on the horizon in terms of the state becoming a true partner includes things like the unfunded mandates. They're enormous. It seems simple to say include financial literacy and then even ethnic studies. Those are great things our students need or deserve to have access to. But to not fund that and require us to do all the work behind it, the curriculum, the hiring of teachers, is just another unfunded mandate amongst the multiple things that have come our way, as an example. So this is a shared responsibility. It's not blaming anyone in particular. So thank you for this chance to share just a little bit about what this means, because accountability, we're not afraid of it. It's something we've been a part of, for decades now, but making sure it's a shared accountability, because sometimes, the outcomes or the direction you're headed in some districts or even some school sites, with the feudal implications at the county level is not helpful at all. So I would hope that we would continue to accelerate our growth or aim for that, so that we can rally together and ensure success for all students. I think we're at a critical time right now to make sure that this accountability is something framed for all of us to be a part of. And our new legislators that are coming on board have that in mind when they're drafting out the budget as well.
Absolutely. I agree with everything you said. And that last point is especially poignant because we are entering a period where we will have new leadership in two of the offices that are most directly impactful for public schools. We'll have a new governor next year or after the 2026 elections, as well as a new state superintendent for public instruction. So it's important that we bring these issues forward and make them central to those elections and to the tenure of the new SPI and the new governor. Make sure that they prioritize the achievement gap. The one thing that you said that I really appreciated is this language about shared accountability. I think that's so important because the locals are on the front lines and have borne the brunt of the mandates and the responsibility and the scrutiny for academic progress. And that comes with the territory. But there are a lot of factors in student achievement, and the state plays a very great role. The legislature plays a great role, the governor, policymakers throughout the system. And so CSBA is going to have a multifaceted, integrated approach to this campaign to close the achievement gap. You mentioned at the close of your comments, budget and legislative integration. It's very important that the budget, that Prop 98 and assistance outside Prop 98 be constructed specifically with the achievement gap in mind. And we are going to be bringing forward a legislative agenda revolving around efforts, new bills that we can propose to close the achievement gap. The state needs to take on more accountability mechanisms where they publish plans with 1, 3, 5-year goals with benchmarks so that the public can evaluate what exactly is the state itself doing to support LEAs and closing the achievement gap. And if those measures are not working effectively, we can have a conversation about making the adjustments to better support LEAs in their work. And of course, targeted funding and support differentiated assistance and lifting up the Fontanas, the work that LAUSD is doing, Sangers and others. We celebrate that progress, but again, how can we move from pockets of excellence to consistent excellence statewide at a time when, despite this year's encouraging results, you still have roughly 2/3 of Black and Latino students and students in other groups as well that are not meeting proficiency in ELA and math. That's millions of students that are being underserved and whose life prospects are being compromised. So that's why we are focused on this. Thank you, everyone, for your participation in this section of the panel. I would like to call back Jeremy and Mary to talk about some of the next steps in the campaign, as well as the next steps in the state accountability and assessment system, and what CSBA has in store for those.
All right, thank you, Troy. And thank you to all the panelists. That was really great to hear from all of you. So as Troy said, there are next steps in this work. We at CSBA plan to continue this work, and we are committed to it. It is challenging, but it is essential. We are all here for students, and it's time for the state to develop a plan, a focused, coherent, intentional plan towards closing gaps in student achievement. As Superintendent Inbody said, LEAs are held accountable every single day, and they don't shy away from that accountability. And it's time for the state to look inward, to look at it itself and becoming that true partner for student outcomes. And they really need to pick up the pace in doing so. So we are committed to being evidence-driven and data-driven in this approach. And so as we move forward in this, today is a first step, but we continue to look forward to the next steps to come. And I'm going to turn it over to Mary to talk about one of our next big landmarks as we move.
Yes, I appreciate that, Jeremy. So, as you heard a little bit earlier, this is going to be an association-wide priority for the next several years where we are really going all in on this. And that means from a range of angles. For example, as Jeremy and I look at the research lens, we are looking at in anticipation to the results of the California School Dashboard in November, and the way that we can use that information to guide our conversations in partnering with the state in developing some sort of a plan and our advocacy in that area. Additionally, we are really looking for ways to make the state efforts more transparent to the public and more effective in conveying what kind of efforts the state is doing in a way that is showing the kind of singular focus that we need on this. And so we are thinking about the state of the gap scorecard. So thinking about having the state take on some accountability for what they are doing in supporting our LEAs. And that can be, at the administration level, at the legislative level, the full range of actors who are involved in making sure that these transformations help and kind of moving us in that direction so that our LEAs can do the work that they want to do in addressing these outcomes together in partnership with the support of the state. Additionally, we are going to connect our data analysis to our legislative and budget advocacy. So, as we go into 2026, we are thinking about what does the governor's budget look like for next year, and how are we going to allocate resources and investments in this strategy of addressing the achievement gap? What kinds of legislative options we have to pursue that CSBA can really support in our work in addressing this issue. And as I think Troy mentioned earlier, we are also anticipating that we have a gubernatorial and SSPI race that will be happening next year. And this will be front and center for our engagement with those candidates, because this is something that we feel any candidate seeking office needs to be able to address and to really be able to present a vision for California education, and taking all of these wonderful investments, wonderful ideas and initiatives, and honing them in partnership to develop a strategic approach that will really allow LEAs to focus on that work.
Thank you, Mary and Jeremy, for providing that preview. I think we're all really excited about engaging in this work in a campaign fashion, given the urgency of the need to close the achievement gap. There are going to be many opportunities to interact with this work, to support among the membership and the general public as we continue to build. So please look out for the dashboard analysis, which is coming in November. Please share this webinar recording with members of CSBA, people in your community who care about education. Everyone who registered for this webinar will receive a link to a recording of this live event. So even if people didn't have the chance to see it live, they will be able to take this information and digest it on their own time. But now we'd like to move to the question and answer section. The first question says that I believe the state mandates ELOP, which does not consider how those children are helped with academics or even attendance. I wonder if that money, which allows trips to Disneyland and lots of fun activities, in addition to providing food and some tutoring, could be better spent elsewhere. I know that ELOP is a big initiative at the state level, and there are LEAs which have embraced ELOP, and there are those that feel that they would rather have less restricted funds that they could use in a way that make more sense for their local communities. So there's not necessarily a consensus of opinion on that, but I open it to the floor to discuss ELOP and how these mandates or what amount to categorical funds do or do not support local efforts to close the achievement gap.
I'll just jump in to say that, all of these programs and policies that we're looking at, we believe are well-intentioned policies that are there because people think that they will genuinely help students. The problem becomes, as Mary put it earlier, is the overlapping of these programs and the reporting requirements around these programs and the ways in which they constrict funding for districts who are focused on improving student outcomes and reducing disparities. And so what we're calling for in this campaign is looking at these programs and asking for that coherent approach towards closing achievement gaps and whether or not they are achieving their ends.
I just want to follow up on Jeremy's comments. One of the struggles I think we have in education is data, and really being able, when you roll out a program like that or late start or, some other initiative, are we looking deeply and know what we're measuring to determine if it's successful, if it's working, if it's moving the needle? And I think that's another part of some of the programs that have been rolled out. There isn't a long-term coherent plan on what your benchmarks would be for a success in that program, or when you would measure it, or how. So just to put a period on that, I just think that's an example of where in a statewide system that really put first student achievement and closing and really addressing that gap, that money may have been delivered differently or may have been framed differently as it landed at your school district. It might have given you more freedom to develop the type of program that would be best served, or you would be best serving your community.
I'll go ahead and add to that. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate the question about the ELOP funds. That's something that we greatly appreciate in Fontana and have used quite extensively to ensure that there is wraparound support for our students from the beginning of the school day to the after school. I think what comes to a challenge for a school district is some of the compliance pieces, because there's a lot of, not just ELOP, other programs as well. There's a lot of time spent on reporting, collecting data, and they're all different programs asking for different types of information. And so if there was a single way to be accountable and to report, that would be so helpful. But we have multiple people doing multiple things for multiple deadlines. And sometimes, and the LCAP is an example of this too, we are reporting on actions of data from the previous year. So we're behind the 8 ball there. It doesn't make sense, but that's the system that we're in. So taking a closer look at things like that and the ELOP and all the requirements that reporting requirements that are required of districts to look at that. How can we do it in a single fashion, if you will? And it's more about the implementation than on spending time reporting data throughout the year.
I would just like to echo what has been said in the sense that individual programs may have very good intentions behind them, may actually at the local level create opportunities to do good work. But what we're talking about is the comprehensive impact. So we at CSBA did a lot of advocacy around SB 1374, which was around the fact that our LEAs are drowning in documentation. With every categorical comes some sort of reporting requirement, or what we saw a lot of, particularly during the early years of the pandemic, was with new one-time funds or relief funds and other programs, plans that are required. So the ELOP plan on top of the LCAP, on top of the school safety plan, on top of the SARC. So it is really, I think we're talking about the the way that it just diffuses our attention and energy, and especially given how many of our districts are small school districts. We talk about a lot of, large districts, they have a huge enrollment, but when we're talking about our small school districts, they are, spending so much of their time in terms of compliance on different initiatives that to develop some sort of strategy that's really focused so that all of their work goes towards improvement on the top priorities, including the achievement gap. It's just the math doesn't math because there is a finite amount of time and energy and resources that LEAs can put into addressing all of these things. Again, if everything is a priority, nothing is a priority.
Thank you. All those points are well taken. I will just interject quickly. I don't want to take us on a tangent, but I would be remiss if I didn't note that CSBA has put forth a couple different pieces of legislation which have passed designed to streamline the reporting process, to identify and consolidate or eliminate where necessary reports that are redundant or are not serving their intended purpose. And the goal of that is not to decrease accountability, but to streamline it so that we're actually focusing on the reports that make a difference for students and not burdening staff with unnecessary reports that subtract from the time they have available to provide direct student support that moves the needle on closing the achievement gap. But thank you all for your comments on that issue. There was a lot of rich material there. Moving on to the next question. What can we learn from the Mississippi Miracle? For those who are not up on the latest lingo in education research or in education journalism, Mississippi Miracle is the pithy name that's given to the rapid success that Mississippi has had in some levels at bringing students to proficiency, particularly in ELA. They've made great leaps in a short amount of time. Louisiana and some other states in the South have made some progress as well. And that's gained a lot of attention. So the question is, what can we learn from the Mississippi Miracle? We need to use proven ELA and math curriculum and best credentialing and teaching practices. All students in the state of California are capable of learning and want to succeed. We must do better. Could not agree with that more, but if you could provide perspective on what exactly went into the Mississippi Miracle, put that in perspective and talk about what is the viability for California. I know that what is always reported in the press, particularly when it's not education journalists, doesn't reflect the nuanced perspective that education researchers and practitioners might have. So I would turn it over to our REPD team to provide a little bit more analysis.
Yeah. So, I mean, the Mississippi Miracle was really a focus and a very top-down approach to looking at early literacy. So really focusing on the early grades and looking intensely at having them follow a prescriptive type of reform. In California, we have less of that top-down approach. We follow more with the idea that locals who are closest to the issue know how to solve that issue best. And so I think what we could learn from it is the value of focus. I think what generally we're asking for here is the state to do what Mississippi asks LEAs to do. We want the state to focus. We want them to be pinpoint in their dedication towards closing achievement gaps as they move forward in their policy making. And as we mentioned here, looking backwards at the policies that they already have to determine their efficacy and what they are doing in terms of what they were designed to do. I don't know, Mary, if you have anything to add.
I think there's still a lot that we are learning about what's happening in some of these states where we've seen progress. And I am looking forward to continuing to kind of track and dive deeper into the data around the results. It does indeed look very promising. I would reinforce what Jeremy has said. In California, we've talked about the California way for a time. And I think, we learned a lot of lessons about what top-down mandates look like in a state as large and diverse diverse as California. And so I think that we have a lot to learn. That focus is really important. But part of the Mississippi Miracle, from what I understand thus far, is that they really, as a state, focused on best practices in literacy instruction. And I think that that is something that we can do without having necessarily the same kind of top-down approach. But part of what we are asking the state to do is to help LEAs build their capacity. So helping each LEA understand some of these best practices in literacy. We are long overdue for an update to our ELA curriculum. And so I think this is an opportunity for us as a state to identify if literacy is a priority, and I understand that it absolutely is, then what can we do as a state to make sure that every LEA has the resources and information, but resources are really important in terms of, understanding those best practices and how to implement them in a way that meets local conditions and needs.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Jeremy. I'm sure that will be an ongoing conversation as there continues to be more examination of the progress they've made in Mississippi and elsewhere.
Troy,
The
I
next-
just want to add,
Yes.
as I've moved about the state during this year as president, looking at the exemplary programs within our regions, I have really noticed within the region, the state has provided an area, a focus and funding for an area that I think is a part of the Mississippi Miracle's success, and that is the investment in our early childhood education. I know from my own district and other districts that I've seen, we have kind of leveled the playing field by making that investment. And as I've talked to colleagues in the South, especially in Mississippi, that's one of the areas that they were proud and they celebrated, that the investment in early childhood education has truly allowed all students to receive at the ground level that opportunity to learn. And in some districts, even here in California, we're starting at what 2 years old, 3 years old, what have you. In my own district, we are starting that investment, and it is making a difference. The other thing that I'm really I believe is happening in California, but it needs to continue to be a focus, is the continuous funding that needs to occur at the elementary level, and the wraparound services that I heard you mention, Superintendent, the wraparound services that will focus on the whole child, developing the academic, social, and emotional. Our homeless situation for our children in California is horrendous. That whole child support will help to minimize that and change the focus to the academics. The state can help us do that if they provide the resources that we need to address those areas. Those wraparound services are critical to the success of every child. Thank you.
Thank you for lifting up those points. I think that's an important contribution to the discussion. Our next question says, regardless of the socioeconomic level, seemingly Black, African American, foundational Black American students are almost consistently at the bottom of the academic ladder. Yes, dollars is an issue, but how do we motivate parents and guardians to motivate their students? Parents and guardians are the major keystone factor. So I don't know if anyone wants to address how we can facilitate parental engagement and support of students' academic journey.
One of the things I think about in terms of our students who are struggling to be successful academically are the different ways that they can demonstrate their success and motivate them to want to do well in the classes that we're expecting them to excel in. So community engagement is critical. And I think for so long, I heard this recently where someone had said that we spent a lot of time trying to involve the community instead of trying to engage them. So I've witnessed principals doing unique things at their schools to engage parents, finding opportunities, whether it's a nighttime event to bring those parents in, but really, I just talked to them today and I just thank them for all the things they're doing to engage parents, to bring them in, because when parents see how much a school site and the staff and personnel want their child to be successful, we love your child just as much as you do. We want them to be successful and we need your help. Parents don't shy away from that. Parents love the fact that some other adult embraces their child and wants them to be successful. So really working on those engagement opportunities to bring parents in, see firsthand how we need them. I think it's critical. There's so much work to do there and various factors as to why, but that's a beginning step that we are continually working on in our district.
I'd like to just add that I know I really support what you've said, because parents do want to get involved. You know, they really are just waiting to be invited to come to the table. I want to mention, just kind of express this about the data that our president-elect Deborah mentioned earlier. Parents are hungry to understand how to help their children. They really want to understand that data perspective. And we are doing training, specific training in our district to really engage parents at that level. Because when the children go home, I mean, they really need to be reinforced in the strategies that are taking place in school. I'm going to just share this as well. Our mayor, our city council, our pastors, all of these groups are really providing an ongoing newsletter information about what we're doing. And I'm talking personally about MPUSC, what we're doing. And that information is passed on to parents within the congregation, within the small sections of our cities. That's how parents are really becoming more aware of the needs of their students and how they can meet those needs. And that full engagement also with superintendents like you are, Mickey, you're doing the work by getting into the community to really make sure that parents are focused on what the school districts are doing and how they can support that work occurring. Parent engagement is critical. I know for our board meetings, we have a number of parents that come and our bilingual parents come, and they are focused on really addressing the needs of each of those kids that are not being successful. And we are making a point of really addressing those needs. So I could go on and on about the individual things that are happening, but parent engagement is critical, and that's what's happening in Mississippi. That's why the success is there.
And if I might add one more thing too, because when you're talking about the achievement rate of some of our students of color,
yes,
it's critical because we started about engagement, but it's critical that our young people see themselves in success in other pockets. So, some of the things that we've done that I think have really made a big difference is made sure we had, historically black college and community university tours for students to see, I can go somewhere, I can feel like included, I feel like I belong. So providing those opportunities, letting parents know how to engage through day pack or other ways, and give opportunities for students to see themselves in a position or in a place that their family might not have, experience in, having gone to college or having taken on moving into a career tech education pathway, making sure there's something for everyone in our educational system where students can see themselves. I think I can be a pilot. I want to go to school for that pathway, etc.
Thank you to all. There's no question that it starts at home, and that's a huge part of the outcomes that we see for our students. But regardless of what's happening in the home, part of this campaign is building the infrastructure at the state level to support good outcomes for students, even if they don't have that type of supportive structure that we might want in the ideal. The next question pertains to the California School Dashboard. It says the dashboard is a good example of something that is not helpful to the overwhelming percentage of parents seeking to understand how their children are doing. Are they reading at grade level? And what can they as parents effectively do to help their children? How would this initiative help address this? And yeah, I would just like to offer some opening comments on that and then put it to the group. But very specifically, we have some accountability demands that we think will address those issues that the questioner raised. First of all, statewide plans and benchmarks. We need to develop and adopt a coherent state level plan for closing the achievement gap. And that plan needs to include annual benchmarks and transparent reporting on the state's own action, not just on local outcomes. Secondly, budget and legislative integration. We need to embed provisions on measures for state level action to close the gap within the governor's budget. We need to be explicit about what those measures are going to be as part of the budget process and the budget language. We also want to introduce legislation on state level initiatives that will increase the state's transparency and accountability for its own efforts to close the gap and provide more state level support for LEAs in their ongoing work to bring all students to proficiency. State accountability mechanisms are another really important piece of this work. Perhaps requiring the annual legislative analyst office accountability reports on state programs to address achievement gaps. LAO does a lot of great work in its annual reports, but shouldn't we be highlighting something as significant as the achievement gap, which has cascade effects on everything else that happens in California? That deserves its own spotlight. Targeted funding and support is always an issue. We need to provide differentiated funding and assistance, technical assistance to LEAs that are serving high need populations or to those that have persistent gaps, even if they're not classified as a stereotypical high need districts, because there are lots of students who are struggling in districts that are seen as affluent or are proficient overall, but you have pockets of students who aren't up to the overall standard in that district. And that's something that we can't overlook. It's not just the low income districts. It's not just the districts that have high levels of African American and Latino students. It's throughout the state. And that's why we need a state level infrastructure to help solve this issue. And then finally, I want to bring it back to the theme of today, which is shared responsibility and accountability and transparency. Clear benchmarks for state agencies, ensuring their policies and decisions enable local school districts and county offices of education rather than constraining them. And I don't know if anybody else would like to supplement that.
I think you put it really well. I think transparency is the key. The state has done some work over the past few years to make data more easy to understand. They have done some work in reorganizing student score reports to make them a little easier to interpret. So I do want to give some credit there on that. And there's still more to do to highlight more data on the dashboard. We just put long-term English learners on the dashboard recently, and we learned how much support that student group really needs now. Because if you don't put the data in front of people, it's not a priority. They don't always know the true state of things on the ground. And that's why when we're talking about the achievement gap, it's really hard, even as a researcher sometimes, to get at all of the different levels of data that are nested on certain websites. And so we need to find a better way to make that more transparent and to surface it to the people who want to learn more about it.
I would also like to add that, a big part of what we're describing and asking the state to kind of take that step back and look at the system as a whole is an opportunity for us to look at those individual components. Right now, CSBA isn't proposing individual solutions to the issue. We really look forward to partnering with the state in this. This is a kind of joint accountability component, but actually really what we are asking for is the state to take a step back, look at the whole picture and all of the different moving parts and components and how they work to support our efforts and areas where we can improve. And so this is an opportunity to revisit some of those items in light of the full picture, and we look forward to that.
And can I just add, in data, and we talked about it today with the CAASPP score release, We should always celebrate successes in education. We should always celebrate the hard work being done and student progress. But we should also not hide our challenges or downplay our challenges. And I think that's the part of analyzing data is celebrating the successes and then figuring out how much further we have to go.
I wanted to add, I appreciate the beginning, talking about the dashboard that's on the horizon here and the complexities of it for our community. I mean, I understand it, but I'm an educator over 30 years, but it's not easy to digest what it means or how to use it. But to use that as a launch pad for strategic planning at the state level, I think would be a critical starting point, because we are ready to lead locally. Our boards of education are on the front lines every day. And I think we can be more successful with a coherent strategy from the state that includes a shared purpose and measurable actions as well.
I think the through line of all your comments is accessibility. I think that's a big issue. We acknowledge that the state has done a lot of work to try and help all students, and especially struggling students. But I think the lack of cohesion is diminishing the effectiveness of some of these piecemeal programs. I was talking with someone yesterday who's extremely knowledgeable about education, and I said, you're probably in the 99th percentile of people who understand what's happening in the California education system. But if I asked you, what is the state's definition of success? What is the 1-year goal, the 5-year goal, the 10-year goal for closing the achievement gap? Where is the link you could point people to on a website that shows what the plan is, that measures the progress, that shows where we have to go and what the strategies are going to be moving forward? It doesn't exist, right? So how do we take this information and put it together into something cohesive and streamline it so that it's accessible to all members of the public, not just the people who live and breathe education every day? So that's also going to be a focus of the campaign. So next we have 2 dueling comments on the subject of ELOP, which seems to be very popular. One person says ELOP is supporting our efforts to close the achievement gap. We have great participation. The other person says it seems we measure nothing for ELOP, which is so frustrating because so much money goes to our district with no accountability. So again, you see this variance in districts and how different districts receive different programs in a different way, and how one blanket approach may not always work in a state as large and diverse as California, where we have a district with 4 students, and then you have LA Unified with over half a million students. So I think that's why the top-down approach is not the way to effectively administer in California. It's more about creating the system of support and the infrastructure to lift up these local efforts in a very targeted, intentional way. So those were more comments than questions, but the next one asks, can you please speak to how a strategy can support homeless children and immigrant children to better engage in academics, closing gaps? Our system is failing them. These groups of children receive more funding, and how are districts using the money for these groups of students, and how are outcomes being measured? So speaking specifically to what's being done to support and to measure progress for homeless children and immigrant children.
I'll go ahead and start the conversation here. We're just a little bit thinking about the seriousness of this question, because there are some facts around that comment. But one of the things that we have recognized this year that has made a tremendous difference thus far, especially for our homeless McKinney-Vento students and our foster youth in particular, is partnering with our county, our big county here, as well as there are so many entities, the city, the county, our county office of education, who are all aiming to do similar work in different pockets. So bringing folks together to align our system, to align our work and target students, we're seeing a big shift and a big difference in connecting to all the resources who are trying to do the same similar work.
I think that that's such an essential point, and it really hammers home our call for coherence from the state, because there are all of these disparate services all trying to do fantastic work at the local level, at the county level, and at the state level. But it's accessing those services and focusing and aligning them is where the state needs to step in and create a plan to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just want to appreciate our panelists for their contribution. I thought this was an excellent discussion on a wide range of topics, but with one common goal. What can we do better to uplift struggling student groups, to close the achievement gap, and to drive overall improvement in student performance? I think that's the question of our time, and thank you for the light you shed on this very important issue. And thank you as well to everyone who joined us in the audience and for your thought-provoking questions. Please know that this is the beginning of the campaign to inspire more state level attention and focus on providing the supports that local educational agencies need to accelerate their work to bring all students to proficiency and close the achievement gap. It's going to be a long journey. It won't be easy work, but it's the most important work there is. And we're glad to have you arm in arm with us. There will be many opportunities for engagement. I want to remind you about the release of the dashboard coming up in November. We will certainly have more information to share with you then. We will be looking to CSBA members and people across from California to be a part of this movement. So stay tuned. There's a lot more to come. We're happy you were with us today. Take care.